All right. So, as I said at the beginning of my channel update video that I did in October, because I didn't get around to Nostalgia Month this year due to health issues and personal issues, I decided to do some top 10 and top 5 lists at the beginning of December as a way to kind of make up for it. These are all nostalgic lists about things that I remember fondly, in my childhood. So let's get started with my top 5 nostalgic shows. Now, these are not necessarily great shows. Most of them on this list are, but the number one, not so much. But these are shows that just give me the warm fuzzies when it comes to nostalgia. Number 5, Dragon Ball Z. I've come to realize as I started recording this, all of the shows on this list are animated, and that's perfectly fine. Maybe I should change the title of this video to Top 5 Animated Nostalgic Shows, or just Top 5 Nostalgic Cartoons. Yeah, I think I'll change it to that. Anyway, Dragon Ball Z was a show that my mother's second husband and I used to sit around and watch together. And it was he and I's show. My other siblings would watch, and occasionally my mom would watch it too. It's actually kind of funny. He loved the show so much that one time he was at work when they were airing a new episode, and my mom had to sit there and watch it with me while on the phone with him and explain to him what was going on. And it was the fight between Tien and Cell. Cell in his second form, not perfect Cell, but right before. And so we're watching it, and Tien's getting the shit kicked out of him, and Cell kicks him and he goes flying, and Mom's exact words on the phone were, Tien just got kicked like a football. I'm not kidding, that happened. And it was just one of those shows that we loved to watch together. It's the only anime show on this list. There are a couple on the honorable mentions list, and I do remember watching Sailor Moon, but with me it was Dragon Ball Z. And don't get me wrong, it's not the greatest anime. It's definitely one of the most popular here in the States, but it's just a bunch of dudes screaming and rocks flying up for like 30 minutes, and then someone says, oh, you have 5 minutes until the Earth explodes, and then it's like 7 episodes later it finally happens. And that's Dragon Ball Z, but it's epic. Very epic, regardless of how corny it can be at times. Number 4, SpongeBob SquarePants. Alright, so this was not put on the list because of Steven Hillenburg's recent passing. As a matter of fact, I wrote out the list before he had passed away, and I'm not going to say much more about this because I decided to go ahead and do a top 20 favorite SpongeBob episodes as a part of this these nostalgic lists that I'm making. SpongeBob was a show that my family loved. And I'm not joking, my youngest brother, Ethan, his first word was Bob Bob. Not Mom, not Dad, Bob Bob. And he called SpongeBob SquarePants, he called it Bob, Bob, and Pat. That's what he called it, Bob, Bob, and Pat. And SpongeBob was his absolute favorite show for the longest time. And hell, my dad, who was in his 40s, loved SpongeBob. I love SpongeBob, I grew up watching it. I remember it first debuted in '99, and I had an aunt who hated the show. She's like, I will never let my kids watch that show. It's just junk food for the mind. It's not gonna last long anyway. And lo and behold, almost 20 years later, this little yellow sponge that Steven Hillenburg created because of his love for marine biology is still going strong. And regardless of the ups and downs that it's had, I have a lot of love and respect for SpongeBob, and I always will. I'm not going to go too far into detail beyond that because I do have a list planned for SpongeBob, but for now, that's all I have to say on it. Number 3, Ed, Edd, and Eddy. So, I was kind of a cartoon kind of kid growing up. As you could tell from SpongeBob, I did watch some Nickelodeon shows, but, Ed, Edd, and Eddy was my jam. Growing up, I was kind of awkward. I mean, I'm still kind of awkward. I mean, fuck, I'm a writer. Like, writers, one of the qualifications is, are you socially awkward? Yes, okay, then you can be a writer. Even the most intelligent writer is socially awkward at some point. It can't be helped. But I also had to deal with a lot of dysfunction at home. One of my mom's marriages, her second one, was not very stable, and so there was a lot of screaming and fighting. And then when I was at school, I was bullied a lot, and I even had trouble with some of the teachers. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Jennings. And yes, I'm going to say her name because she's a bitch. And I want the school here in town to hear that I'm saying her name and that she's a bitch. Anyway, she wasn't a good teacher. There were certain kids she was nice to, but more often than not, she was just mean. She would scream at her students. And I wasn't the only one that had problems with her. There were a lot of other kids who did too. But I had to deal with her. I had to deal with the kids picking on me because they saw her picking on me, so they thought it was okay. And there was a lot of screaming and fighting at home. So Ed, Edd n Eddy was that reprieve. And you would think that a show about these 3 guys who were trying to scam people for jawbreakers, who were constantly being bullied by the other kids, would be difficult for me to watch, but I never watched it like, oh man, I can't, this is too real. For me, it was more like, yep, I've been there. And of course, my favorite character is Double D. Absolutely. They're all amazing characters, but Double D was always my favorite, and the made-for-TV movie was amazing. It was one of those things where they took the show and they just made the perfect movie out of it. There was no better way to wrap up the show than with the Ed, Edd n Eddy Big Picture show. And I think I heard that they were wanting to bring it back. I hope to God not. This was one of those shows that it ran for 10 years. It ran as long as it needed to. It ended like it needed to, and it needs to stay done. And I think Danny Antonucci, the creator, even said so himself that he was done with it. And I doubt that he's going to let them just take it. So hopefully it stays where it deserves, stays in that special Hall of Fame where really good Cartoon Network shows should be, and should just be left alone to bask in the glory of everything it did. Number 2, Courage the Cowardly Dog. Oh, Courage. So this is just a nostalgic list, but if this was a top 5 favorite cartoons or favorite shows, then Courage the Cowardly Dog would be number 1. I am convinced without a shadow of a doubt, that Courage the Cowardly Dog is the best cartoon that was ever made. I absolutely love it. I love every part of it. It can be creepy, it can be funny, it can be heartfelt. It touched on topics that not a lot of cartoons would. The episode that, pops off the top of my head is The Mask. It talks about domestic violence, female on female relationships. It's like, damn, that took some balls. Like some balls or some ovaries. It took some massive genitalia to do that. And it was weird because this show, my entire family loved it. It would come on and we could hear my mom say, guys, Courage is on, and we would all descend, whatever. We would all congregate, there's the proper word, congregate around the television set and watch Courage. And it didn't matter who pissed off who that day. It didn't matter if, we pissed off mom or what happened. When Courage was on, we were all a family. We were all watching it together. And there was only ever one episode that scared my siblings too much. And by siblings, I mean my sister. Joanna, if you're watching, you know what episode I'm talking about. And that was the mattress episode when Muriel's... I can't think of the word. Give me a second. See, this is how my brain works. It just loses words. Okay, I can't think of it. She's taken over by the demon that's in the mattress. And at one point, she starts laughing and her head starts spinning on her shoulders. And there was something about that just scared the shit out of my sister. She noped the fuck out of the room. She just went, nope, and left. Was like, nope, not doing that. Sorry. Regardless, though, Courage was one of those shows that, well, not to sound corny, but had courage. It had a huge set of balls and or ovaries. And it touched on topics not a lot of cartoons did back then. It could be funny, it could be heartfelt, it could be scary. The people behind that show were not afraid to just try new things. It's amazing what such a little show accomplished in, 3 years? It was only on the air for 3 years. And it's one of the most iconic Cartoon Network cartoons ever. So yeah, I'm gonna just go to number one because I could just go on and on about how much I love this show. So let's just, before we get to number one though, I want to list off a few honorable mentions. And as I said, some of these are live action shows. So Family Matters. I loved Family Matters. I didn't watch a lot of it, but every time I did, it was so fun. And I've heard people say that Urkel like annoyed them, but honestly, he didn't annoy me. I really liked him. I thought he was funny. All of the acting's really good, and like a lot of TV shows back in, like sitcoms back in that day, they had those, episodes about drugs and episodes about drinking and premarital sex and things like that, but I never recalled rolling my eyes. There are certain sitcoms and they talk about those things, you just roll your eyes, you're like, oh, great. But I remember one episode where the punch was spiked at a party and Urkel got drunk. And then there was one where Eddie was racially profiled by a police officer, and people were spreading rumors about, I can't remember her name, Urkel's love interest. Can't remember her name, but this guy was claiming that he slept with her and she was upset about it and stuff like that. It touched on serious topics and there was a little corniness to it, but I really liked the show for what it was. Cops. Cops. When I was a kid in the police, I loved this show so much. I watched it with my mom's mom. The cops would come into like Pizza Hut where we'd be eating, and I would start singing, bad boys, bad boys. If you could imagine a 3-year-old in a high chair singing bad boys, what you gonna do to some cops. They were good sports about it, but apparently it was super cute. Dexter's Lab. Love Dexter's Lab. It got pretty bad there towards the end, but I really did love Dexter's Lab. I loved the voice actress who played Dexter as well. I believe she passed away a few years ago, tragically. But yeah, she was amazing, and Dexter was just a fun show. Not my absolute favorite, but when it came on, I watched it. And then finally, okay, so kids that are about my age, that loved cartoons growing up, we're all guilty of liking at least one 4Kids property. We can't help it. It just, when you're a kid and it's a cartoon, you don't think about the censorship and what they're cutting apart. You just think about, oh, yeah, I like this show. So I have 3 on this list. First of all, one being Pokemon, and the next being Yu-Gi-Oh!, both of which I watched a little bit. When it comes to Pokemon, I'm more of a fan of the video games. But the ultimate 4Kids show that I watched a lot, that I was excited for every Saturday morning, was Sonic X. I watched the Japanese dub last year to review the Japanese dub, the actual show. I did an entire review of like all of the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoons for Nostalgia Month last year. And because I watched it, I can't take the English dub seriously anymore. The only thing about the English dub as an adult that I like is the voice cast. I think they had some very, very talented voice actors for the voice cast in the anime, and they later on went to voice in some of the video games, and they received a lot of shit for it for some reason. I never understood why the fan base hated them so much, but I really liked him. The guy who voiced Sonic today is my favorite voice actor for Sonic, and that might be nostalgia, but I can't help it. So anyway, those are the honorable mentions. Let's get to number 1. And my number 1 most nostalgic cartoon is Sonic Underground. Alright, so I'm not going to sit here and try and say that this is a good show. It's not. But in my review of this show, I stated that this was my introduction to Sonic. Not the games, not the original cartoons, but this cartoon that was canceled before it even came here to the States, was in syndication, and here in the US, you could maybe catch an episode or 2 on a weird-ass channel at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, this is the show that introduced me to Sonic. And one thing I will say, there are a lot of things that this show did wrong, but I've always respected it for what it tried to do. It tried to tell a dark story. And if you say the plot out loud to yourself, you think, wow, you know what, they really did try. It's a story of a queen, a mother, whose country is taken over by a dictator, and she's forced to go on the run, and while in seclusion gives birth to 3 triplets, and she has to give up her own children for their protection, and then hide and hope and pray that, like, when they grow up, they're willing to pursue and destroy this dictator and take back their thrones to help their country, which has fallen into disarray because of what this guy has done. So when you say it like that, you realize, yeah, you know what, this show had a lot of potential. And it did. It had a lot of potential. It just sucked. The writing wasn't that good. Despite having good voice actors, they don't give the best performances. Jaleel White as the 3 triplets, I thought it was good. His worst performance, I think, is Sonya. I said this in my review. Some days she sounds convincing, and then others she sounds like Steve Urkel with a head cold. But the one thing I will defend is that people like to say that this is the worst Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, and I will say no to that until the day I die, and here's why. In terms of cringiness, yes. The reason that people mistake Sonic Underground as the worst is because it's super cringy, because the stupid music segments, the triplets are in a band, and all the music's awful. The actual instrumentals aren't, but the singing is awful, and it makes you cringe. Like, mega cringe. But with Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, the first cartoon that ever debuted here in the US, it didn't try anything new. It was just very loud, screaming colors in your face constantly. It didn't try anything, so it didn't really fail at anything. It's just kind of an annoying, loud cartoon. Sonic Underground tried to talk about things like dystopia and loss and death and things like that, but it failed. And when you're trying to do all this stuff and you fail, you stand out more than a show that didn't really try to do anything. So, is it the second worst cartoon ever? When it comes to, like, Sonic the Hedgehog? Sure, yeah. I mean, unless you're counting that Sonic the Hedgehog movie, then it's like the third worst. But it is not the worst cartoon. And as I said, I will defend it till the day I'm dead. It's awful. It's a shit pile. It's a dumpster fire, but it is not the worst Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon ever. This was a show that encouraged me to play music, and I said that I wanted to be a rock star like Sonic, but honestly, I wanted to be a drummer like Manic. When I auditioned to be in band in middle school, I tried the drums, and I just was not coordinated enough. So they handed me a trumpet mouthpiece, and they were like, oh, you're a natural. So that's what I ended up playing all through middle school, high school, and into college. But yeah, this show encouraged me to try new things. And one of the very first stories I ever wrote was a Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction. And it's just, this show encouraged me to be creative, despite the fact that it kind of failed at being creative on its own, so. Alright, so my next list that I will be uploading actually on the 7th, so a couple days from now, is my top 5 nostalgic video games. Yeah, I actually do play video games, I just don't hardly ever talk about them. So, I will see you guys next time.